Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lit Chick on a Mighty Blaze. I'm Jenna Paone, and I am beyond thrilled to welcome today a legend on the page, on the bookshelf, one of my very, very favorite authors of all time, the fabulous #1 New York Times bestselling Emily Giffin. Emily, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Jenna, for having me. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to join you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure for us today, especially today on a day like today. I do want to just say right off the bat, this is a dark day for women everywhere. Here at the Blaze, we are a progressive organization that is committed to equality and opportunity for all. And a lot of things are weighing very heavily on our minds right now, certain Supreme Court decisions. We are going to do our best to give you all a respite from that today, right now. Emily, your books certainly have provided me a respite over the years and this week, especially as I was reading your fabulous book. We're so thrilled about it. Meant to Be is your new book out this summer. We are so excited about this book. This book is fabulous. It's everything I want in a anytime read, but a summer read especially. It's so captivating and so wonderful and well crafted, and it's just fabulous. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. That's very, very kind. And that's definitely what I wanted to do with this book. I think, the decision today obviously just happened, but along the way, there's so many dark things going on in our country and the world. And I was feeling the weight of that when I started this book 2 years ago. And I decided I wanted to write a love story. I wanted to just escape to the mid 90s, to what in some ways felt like a simpler time. We have to be careful about that, though.
I know.
A lot of things were, worse than for a lot of people, but I focused on the more nostalgic, happier parts of the mid 90s in writing this book. I set it in New York City and in the Hamptons, where I was living at the time and vacationing at the time. And I just wanted to write a love story and a book that you could dive into and sort of forget everything for a little while.
Well, that is exactly, I think, what we all need right now. And it's exactly what happened to me this week. I remember, while reading it, my husband was trying to talk to me and I was like, nope, I'm not hearing you. I'm fully in this world right now with Joe and Kate. Before we get too deep into the book, I want to backtrack and just give all of the wonderful people out there, I want to sing your praises a little bit, give them a little background on you and your fabulous books over the years. Emily Giffin, a Chicago native, is a graduate of Wake Forest University and the University of Virginia School of Law. After practicing litigation at a Manhattan firm for several years, she moved to London to write full-time. It was there that she began writing Something Borrowed, her smash hit debut that catapulted her to the top of the bestseller lists. Dubbed a modern Jane Austen by Vanity Fair and a dependably down-to-earth storyteller by the New York Times, Giffin has since penned 9 more New York Times bestsellers, including Something Blue, All We Ever Wanted, The Lies That Bind, and her latest, Meant to Be. All of her novels, filled with endearingly flawed characters and emotional complexity, have resonated deeply with both critics and readers around the world, achieving bestseller status in a number of countries. In addition, 5 of her novels have been optioned for the big screen and are in various stages of development. The first, Something Borrowed, hit theaters in May 2011, starring Kate Hudson, Ginnifer Goodwin, and John Krasinski. Giffin now resides with her husband and 3 children in Atlanta. Her 11th novel, Meant to Be, which is out now and already a New York Times bestseller, is an irresistible story about a restless golden boy and a girl with a troubled past as they try to navigate a love story that may be doomed before it even begins. Kirkus Reviews says Giffin's latest charts the course of true love between an American aristocrat and a troubled fashionista, an intriguing meditation on the meaning of meant to be. Emily, welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you again.
We are so thrilled to have you. And I do want to point out, so this book is about it. It's a love story. It is, I want to say off the bat, it's a complete fictionalization. There is, it's not nonfiction, but you were deeply inspired by the tragic love story of JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. Can you tell us a little bit about what first inspired you to fictionalize these people's lives?
Absolutely. And I love how you said that. I was inspired by, the book's not based on, weren't, inspired by, but you have to kind of go back to my childhood. My mother raised my sister and me to love the royals and love the Kennedys. When the Kennedys are sort of our royals, right? So
Yes, absolutely.
I was fascinated at a very young age with the inner workings of the family, with the so-called Kennedy curse, with
Yep.
obviously the tragic components of those images of John Kennedy Jr. saluting his father's casket when he was just 3 years old, and then there was the tabloids. We grew up. I know I'm older than you, but like John Kennedy Jr. was a little bit older than I, and seeing him, ride a bike in the city and go out to the Cape and be in the ocean, and he got cuter and cuter, and we got more.
Was there ever a more handsome man than I know like JFK, everybody's, but like JFK Jr. is just like the most, like when you think of the definition of handsome, it is JFK Jr. At least to me.
Absolutely. He is like the gold standard. He's he had everything. And I think then fast forward, I graduate from law school, which I chose Virginia in part because Kennedys have gone there, but graduated from law school, moved to New York City. And that's during the time when John and Carolyn were, John was starting George magazine, and he was falling in love with Carolyn and secretly engaged and then married. And it sort of, reignited my imagination and enchanted me even more than, all the childhood Kennedy aspects. And I think in some ways it was because anyone who was alive at the time and paying attention, we pinned a lot of hopes on his happily ever after, because his father's life ended so tragically that we wanted there to be a fairy tale to sort of fix all of that. And, when we talked a little bit before we went on air, that you were in Nantucket, as was your producer. I was in the Hamptons. So, in that little area of the world. And it was just absolutely the most shocking news, you could imagine, and devastating. And I never left the TV. I was in the basement of a crowded summer share, and I never left the basement watching this little, TV. And just in disbelief and thinking that at any moment he would come out of the surf and it would be fine. And he would have that little grin on his face. And so I think going back then, I was obviously a lawyer. I wasn't a writer then. And although I was writing a book that was ultimately never published, rejected across the board, but that's another story.
Someday I hope you put out. I want to see that book someday.
Oh, well, you might be the only purchaser of that, but
I don't.
But beginning, I think that day, that time, there was this sense of like, what if you had it flown the plane? What if it hadn't gone down? What if, would they have stayed together? What would their lives look like? Was she happy? Was he happy? Would they get their happily ever after? And so I think the seeds were planted then. And over the years, I thought a lot about writing, a fictionalized sort of, inspired by Kennedy-esque feel, just as I've often thought about doing that with the royals as well. And I just, as I said, I think at the outset here, I wanted to it felt like the right moment in time to have that escape and to, write about these characters in this love story. And although people think of my books as sort of romance, like they really aren't. Usually the central dilemma in the book doesn't involve a relationship. It usually involves like a friendship or a parents and child, or that's one component of the story, but this is like a definitional love story. So that's
I love. And I think I was going to ask this question later, but I feel like maybe just because you were saying that, we should go into it now. Like, I actually do feel like you're one of my favorite authors for conveying relationships and conveying like healthy, like, I think you write love very well. I always feel like when I know that a book has nailed it, or a film or any sort of piece of art that talks about a relationship, when I feel like I'm falling in love along with the characters, like you get that sense of like those butterflies and like that feeling of like, oh my God, I'm remembering like that first night with, my person. Like I get that so much from this book. I mean, there are so many moments where you're just like, you can't help, like, I was just like grinning like an idiot reading this book. How do you approach that? How do you approach, writing? Is it just something that organically, you try to convey like your own experiences? Or do you kind of approach it in any sort of specific way? Or is this how
Yeah.
it comes out?
Well, thank you, by the way. I love hearing that you were swept up into Joe and Kate's world. I certainly was as I wrote the book. I had so much fun writing it. But, there's anxious moments in this book, really. Like, we won't do any spoilers. We won't, tell you what happens. But, there's every relationship has its challenges. And even, the new relationships with the blood, like when everything feels so rosy, there's inevitably going to be your first fight, your first pitfall. And when you layer on top of it, this complicated dynamic between the nation, the world's most eligible bachelor, Joe Kingsley comes from his father died. He was an astronaut who died, but astronauts in the 60s were as big as politicians. I mean, they were like heroes. They were
Heroes, yeah.
Sports idols and presidents all sort of wrapped into one. But so to write that character and then have him, fall in love with a woman who didn't go to college and is from a very troubled background, that's a recipe for tension and conflict and obstacles to overcome. And really a great way to explore the question of, can love conquer all? As Kirk has said, are certain relationships meant to be? That's my title. And so, I tried to put myself. I've obviously never been, with absolutely no offense to my wonderful husband, I've never been in a situation, where I've been dating someone that like the whole world's in love with. Like, our backgrounds are very similar. That we're just coming up middle class and same sort of educational background, and so that wasn't something that I had ever experienced.
Right.
But there's so many universal components to falling in love, and there's so many universal components to wondering if you're compatible with someone and whether that this is your person. We all as women have asked ourselves those questions. Men have too, and so it was easy for me to escape into these characters' heads. And because it was written from the alternating viewpoints and they have such different backgrounds, that also provided a lot of it was fun for me to be in Joe's head at 1 week and then Kate's the next, and see things from both points of view.
Did you struggle at all with either, so did you know from the beginning, I'm going to tell this in alternating viewpoints, I'm going to do this, back and forth, or did you ever consider just one of their viewpoints? And was one easier or more difficult for you to access? How was that? Because I do love the alternating viewpoints, and I think you write Joe very as believably as Kate, which I think, we always talk about the, different point of views and whether it's harder or easier to access. I'm wondering if you dealt with that at all.
Well, thank you for that. I would never not write a book with at least one main female protagonist, because obviously I am a woman, and that's the easiest viewpoint for me to access, and that's just always going to be a given. But I will write another viewpoint where I think it brings another dimension to the story. And I think in this case, I think I wanted to see what was he thinking about in these situations. And because Kate was written in the first person, the only way to really get at what he was thinking in any deep way, other than him telling her directly on the page, would be to write from his point of view. So, I wouldn't say it's sort of surprising to me that I didn't find Joe to be difficult, because I'm not a man and I'm not famous. And, it's like, you're not from that family or that world. But again, it comes down to this universality of like emotions. Like Joe had a lot of insecurities and a lot of confusion about what he wanted in life. And I think at the end of the day, we're all more alike than we are, different. And it's just about sort of tapping into that, like, what would that feel? What would that feel like? What would he be thinking? Like, do you want to please your parents so much, or do you want to like follow your own heart? And
Right.
what does that look like? And we've all, whether we're, we don't have to be a Joe Kingsley or a John Kennedy Jr. to know what it likes to know what it is like to pursue a relationship that all your friends approve of or your parents approve of, versus maybe one that is, more just internal and heartfelt, but not what other people want for you. And the same is true with jobs, I think, and a lot of decisions we make. Going back to Something Borrowed, first book I ever wrote, I never, fell in love with my best friend's fiance, but Rachel's decision, fortunately, or husband, et cetera, but Rachel's decision to pursue this at turning 30 and pursue this relationship was very similar to my feeling in turning 30 and deciding I want to quit my job as a lawyer and move to London and write full time.
Right.
So it's like that. Like, I can't relate to the exact situation, but certainly the emotions are familiar. And the same was true with Meant to Be. Like, what do you do in those moments?
And what I appreciate about that, going back to, Something Borrowed, and which, by the way, I mean, who doesn't love Something Borrowed? Like, I love Something Borrowed. I love Something Blue. I love all of your books. What I appreciate about your books, again, are something we talked briefly about before, but they're about really ultimately women's relationships with themselves and what they want, and of course in this book, it's also about Joe and what he wants. And it's about what people want and relationships in the sense of not just all romance, but friendships, familiar relationships, those ties that bind, but that is, and I feel like you've always come from a feminist viewpoint on this. I mean, when you read Something Borrowed, it is as applicable today. It's not just about like, oh, I fell in love with this guy. Like, it's not reductive in any way. It's really about this sense of, it's not about like the romance. It's about, who am I? What is right for me? What role have I been playing all my life? And what role do I want to play in the future? When you started writing the books you're writing, did you know you wanted to write so-called women's fiction? Like, did you set out to like, this is the type of book I want to write? This is the way I want to approach it. Did it kind of happen organically? And then you were like, oh, this is what I'm doing. This is what came out. Like, I'm always interested to hear, when you sat down and wrote that first novel, what was your goal? Were you like, I want to be this writer? I want to, like, because after many years, like in the creative world, like I know that I spent kind of the first 5 to 10 years of my career, I spent it in the music industry doing a different type of writing, but like it took me a while to figure out who I was and what viewpoint I actually really wanted to explore. I'm curious if that's something that you experienced at all in starting to write.
Yeah, that's such an interesting, like, to go back and sort of remember the time of when I started out. I've always been fascinated just by relationships. Sitting in, my kitchen growing up and talking to my mother and sister. I mentioned the royal family and the Kennedys, but just talking about, wonder what that's like for her. Wonder that's, or, I guess in some ways it would be like family gossip, but just sort of talking about the cousins and the aunts and the uncles, but not in a mean-spirited way, just in a, analytical way. And we always have just focused on, relationships. And I believe that, I do write women's fiction. It's called that. The industry calls it that. But because I write relationships and there's men in them, it's always interesting to me that it feels like it's the domain of women, but relationships are comprised by, men too. I mean, you think of your life and, whether you're, gay or straight or male or woman, like you're going to have a ton of relationships. You have a father, you have brothers, you have best friends. And so that's what I love to explore. And it never occurred to me to write another kind of book that isn't sort of exploring relationships and who we are as people. And there's so much to explore because life is so messy and relationships are so complicated and things are not, fairy tales. And, people split up and they betray one another and friendships fracture and, we drift apart and we screw up and other people, but, make mistakes that impact us, and we have to forgive, and we have to be forgiven. And so there's endless sort of material there to work with. And decisions, as you mentioned, about, at the end of the day, I think you're absolutely right. Feminism is about like owning your life and your choices and your body and your, everything related to that. And so these characters, they make mistakes. My characters make mistakes, and some of them might not even behave as feminists at various times. They're going to tell true stories of true, real people. But all of the books, in a sense, are journeys about what do we want, who we are, and what we want our relationships to look like.
I think it's a testament to your abilities and your viewpoint that like your breakout hit, the book that this book is, and it was and is an icon. I mean, like this book, the book, the movie, I mean, this is something that I feel like everybody has read, everybody loves, like, certainly in my world. And I feel like it's like a double achievement because you did it with a book about infidelity, where the main character is the one engaging in infidelity, in what we would typically think of a situation where you would have, kind of no understanding or no, there would be no grace granted to that person. Right. And Rachel is so likable. Rachel is so, we understand, like the complexity is so deep. And I think that's a testament to the way you approach it from a realistic viewpoint, as you do in Meant to Be. And I don't want to talk all about something, I want to talk about Meant to Be.
It's applicable because that was the first. And also people, I don't feel bad about spoiling that ending because you've had like 20 years to read it. To this one, we don't want to get, it just came out. So we don't want to like give up the plot too much. But yeah, I think the themes remain, like you said. I mean, it is interesting to me. I joke about this sometimes, but you write a character who's having an affair with her best friend's fiance months before the wedding, like months, right? While you're going to help her pick out her dress. Like it's like unconscionable. It's terrible. Like, and that was part of the fun and the challenge for me of finding, trying to conjure empathy for the reader and that character. And the trick is, if you make Darcy so unlikable, then it becomes like, well, why is he engaged to her? Or why didn't she jettison this friendship way sooner? But that's a balancing act with each book. But
yet you made us love Darcy in something.
Well, I love Darcy.
I love Darcy too. I mean, like, I love Darcy, and who doesn't? I would love to get that Something Blue movie someday. Please, Hollywood, let's get it.
You and me both. Oh, so frustrating how slow they are. But but then there have been books where I think this is not very unlikable. Like The One and Only. That's my most controversial book. It's about football. A famous football coach. A girl falls in love with this famous football coach who happens to be her best friend's father. So there's a 20-year age difference. Which isn't that bad, but there's a 20-year age difference. The mother is deceased, so there's no infidelity. There's just an age difference.
Right.
Yet people were like, "Oh my gosh, that's so gross! Like, how could she be hooking up with her best friend's father? Like, that's sick." Which is just, I just think it's funny, right? Because and then they say, "Oh, it's like incest." I mean, it's definitionally not incest. They're not related by blood or marriage. Like, they're not related. But it's interesting to and then there's a lot of sociological sort of analysis that I've done that sort of goes into what will readers forgive more than others. Another example is Baby Proof. The first sentence of that book which isn't about babies, so it's kind of a bad title, but the first sentence of that book is, "I never wanted to be a mother." And I remember my editor saying to me, "Ooh, I don't know about that line. Like, I don't know if like women are going to be, and I think in some ways it is the last taboo against women. You can be
100%.
You stay-at-home mother, you can be a working mother, but like if you could be a woman who desperately wants to have a child and can't get there through in vitro, but if you just opt out, people are, they're I think wary or critical.
As somebody who is a new mom, who I have a 1.5-year-old daughter, and she's my first, and like who is always, I know you're a mother as well, and now I understand. Like, I did not realize how strongly people hated women until now, until becoming a mother, and the reverence of motherhood, and just the
Yeah,
abject like dismissal of if you say anything is not perfect. And I love my daughter, and I'm so
right. Of
happy to be her
course.
mother. But I easily, I'm 37 now. I was 35 when I got pregnant. Like, I waited a long time to have children, and I really thought about that, and I appreciate the willingness to go there and to
Right,
consider that and to present that. I think we need to
right.
have these conversations. We need to have these conversations in all different ways. Yeah, Margaret. But back to, I do want to go
Yeah,
back to
yeah.
meant to be for just a little bit, which I
Oh,
love,
yeah.
and I'm a Kennedy. I mean, I'm from Massachusetts. I have a house on the Cape that I've been a summer resident of the Cape my whole life. And have actually spent most of the pandemic down on the Cape, which is, I'm sure a lot of people did. And The Kennedys are very present in, and have always been very present, obviously, in the Massachusetts conscious. I live not too far from, the Kennedy compound. I don't know if people saw my Instagram stories, but I did show one of their boats. We actually
I love your Instagram
we
story.
sail sometimes in the bay where that's off of the compound. So we very respectfully from a distance occasionally wave hello to the boats, and they're beautiful boats. Like that.
Beautiful.
But it's such an iconic family. And I'm a royal person too. I love the royal family. I love the Kennedys. I love that storied history. There's just so much there. Even
Yeah,
there's a lot of despicable stuff that happens too. There's a lot of questionable stuff, but there's
yeah,
something about these sort of dynastic families that are just so intriguing and
yeah.
lead to such rich stories. I also find myself a bit intimidated by the idea of writing about that. What was that like for you to tackle this? And clearly, this is done in such a respectful way. It's done in such a way that has great reverence for the real people and the real events that transpired, while also injecting a truthfulness and and an understanding and an exploration. So, what was it like for you to actually tackle these real people? And did you struggle at any point with a
Yeah.
little intimidation or questioning of like how you were going to portray it, and whether, and if
Right.
so, how did you kind of overcome that and get to the place where this book eventually got?
That's a great question, and you're absolutely right. I did struggle with that at the outset, as I
Hmm.
knew that I wanted to write this story,
Yeah.
and in making those choices and making
Yeah.
those decisions, and then once I made the decisions about the characters,
Hmm.
and for example, chose to make Kate Cooper very different than Carolyn
Yeah.
Bessette. She
Yes.
looks like her, but
Yeah.
she's very different background. And once I made those decisions that really distanced
Yeah.
my characters from the inspiration, I felt that I was at liberty to tell my fictional story, and that sort of the burden or worry was lifted, and I
Mhm.
just you know was in my fictional world.
Yeah.
But that said, there was always parts of me that I would, I knew I was going to do an author's note
Yeah.
saying, this is
Yeah.
inspired by. And I, at the same time, even though I felt free to do what I wanted because they were very much fictionalized people, I also wanted to write a book that if anyone from Carolyn's, the Bissett family or the Kennedy family were to ever pick the book up or hear someone
Yeah.
talk about it, that they wouldn't that I made responsible, respectful choices.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you felt that way. And when there were kind of nods to the real life people and tried to make it fairly trivial, like
Yeah.
a restaurant or
The
and
hat.
again, those choices were made in a respectful way. Like
Yeah.
I that's definitely something that was important to me.
Mhm.
But something else that you started talking about these families that I
Mhm.
think is so interesting is
Yes.
it. When we think about the Kennedys and the royal family, the reason that we are interested in them isn't because of the accomplishments or
Yeah.
or the career or the life of any one person. We
Right.
love Brad Pitt because in his 20s he took these roles and we started to love him as an actor, and then from that point on, of course, we were interested in who he was dating or married to,
Right.
or we know his kids and so forth. So it
Right.
sort of started at however old he was and was it Thelma and Louise was his first breakout?
Yes, yeah, Thelma and Louise.
Whatever that would be. And if you take most celebrities, that's the case, right? Like that's when, but with the royals and with the Kennedys, the reason that we follow them, the reason that we feel that we know them is because we of their position in a family, and we're all in a family.
Right.
And so, and then of course, because they're famous for being in a family versus, their accomplishments per se, or another, just another basis of celebrity. We see John being born. We see him, we see the funerals and the birthdays and the celebrations and the growing up and the falling in love, and we watch it all. So it's almost like this reality television show that's rooted in, generations of understanding who the main players are. Yeah. So it's compelling in a way that I think other forms of fame aren't. I mean, some people don't care about the royals and don't care about the Kennedys, but assuming that you do, it's because of that. And so I'm really into, the other thing, if you don't like the Kennedys, you don't know anything about the Kennedys, this book will just read like a love story.
Right. And you don't have to care about the Kennedys at all. Like you could read this without any prior understanding of any situation and like appreciate it for a really well done love story.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was important to me to do as well, because I mean, there's a lot of young people who don't care, and there's a lot of older people, like a lot of people don't care. But I did want to convey that sense of, that level of fame that I feel can only come with a whole family of.
Look at the Kardashians, right?
Yeah,
like, I mean, like that's it, and it's so interesting because as opposed to the Kardashians, where ostensibly they have shown us, they've still only shown us a small, a very thoughtfully premeditated presentation of their lives, right? They have really like they have shown us. Yep, they have curated it to a T, and like they have done it in a way, whereas these families, like the royals, famously, like we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. The Kennedys, same thing. We can only imagine. Even in the Kardashians, I'll tell you, you can only imagine what goes on behind closed doors. Like, you do not know the Kardashians, no matter how many reality shows they film. But families are so interesting because it's just like all the opportunities for the dynamics, right? You have the familial relationships, you have sibling relationships, you have friendships, you have, the people around the family that work.
Ex-boyfriends that hang around, which is like you have, current husbands, ex-husbands, like you have all, And I think the Kardashians, I mean, it is a fair comparison in the sense that, a baby is born and you instantly know who they are. Whereas because you're following the family, and Kris Jenner is the grandmother. And it's funny that you mentioned the Kardashians too, because I had never watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
No, I'm not a Kardashian person. I don't like.
But I'll say this. I mean, I never have been. I've never watched it. I don't follow any of them. But in the last 3 days, I'm just kind of coming down from my book tour, and in like this. Somehow, I had some friends over, we sort of flipped to it, and I ended up watching the whole thing. I did. And I should also just say, I was surprised at how nice the women were. They're like pretty nice people, and how savvy they were. I didn't expect.
They're so savvy. No, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. Like, I have a grudging respect for the Kardashians. It's just not it's not my brand. Like, I'm more into the royals. Like, I am much more into that, or the Kennedy thing. Like, I'm a New Englander. Like, I'm like, a little bit.
But when you start watching it and it falls away, and it's Kim Kardashian or Kanye or whatever, you start seeing just the dynamic of, like the older sister, what's her name? What Courtney, what do you do when you're getting remarried? And you're getting engaged? Do the kids from your first marriage, are they included in the engagement hoopla, or are they not? Do you give the husband a heads up? I remember Tom Brady and Giselle, didn't they get married without telling Bridget? Like they took the babe, like the boy for the weekend.
I should know that. I mean, I should know that. I'm a big.
I think he did. I think the story went that they picked him up for the weekend and then they got married, which is their right to do. But there's layers there, right?
Yeah.
And so you peel
It's
away.
fascinating. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
modern day, it's a soap opera. It's like, this is why families are interesting.
They are
And
fascinating.
families are so interesting. And anytime you have a family and set any sort of story or reality or anything around it, things are going to happen, because families
Right.
are difficult and interesting and complicated, and a million wonderful and terrible things.
And we can all relate to those
yeah,
things.
yeah,
You know, we
yeah,
can all
totally.
relate to divorce, whether our
Yeah,
parents are divorced or we're divorced. We've certainly seen it. So,
yeah.
yeah, I think it's so much fun to write that.
I do too, and I'm seeing some questions from the audience, and I'm so thrilled to see them. We are going to get to some in just a few minutes. I'm going to ask like one or two more questions of Emily, and then we'll turn it over to you. So if you have a question for Emily, please pop it in the chat, and we'll try to get to it. And thank you all for joining us today. I love that we're seeing some faces, and people are so excited about the book and love the book. You wrote this book, as you said, as an escape. Your last couple of books were a little heavier, a little darker. And it's also, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's the only book that is sort of like a fictionalized, inspired
Correct.
so closely by like kind of like historical events,
Right.
whereas you usually kind of come at a book from a totally different, like, like here is a situation. What prompted you to kind of make that switch? Why was this at the right time for you to write this book? I'm sure we can all guess why it was the right time for you to write this book, given the past 2 years. But I'd love to hear it from in your own words.
Yeah.
I'd also love to hear, was it different? Was it a different entry point, or do you kind of always start with character and this was just starting with character? Or do you usually have a different entry point to that book? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
I think, yes, the first part was very much like, I've had enough, like pandemic, dark, I want to just go back into time and escape, and write something lighter, something that felt lighter. So that was for sure part of it. But the other part of it was I finally like convinced my editor like that to do it, because I'd brought it up before and she was like, oh, she was kind of uncertain, and I always sort of bounce those ideas off of her, and she sort of felt like, okay, yes, like go for it. So with her blessing and me feeling like I just wanted to write about this, I went for it. And so, what was your second part?
The second one was, so you obviously started with character in this one. You started with real people and inspired by real life events.
Yes.
Are you always like, is your entry point into a project typically the same? Are you a character first and then like situation setting? Are you setting driven? Like what's your usual process for entering a new story?
Right. The process is always, so I've written 12, including the one that was never published, but 11 published. And they all start with kind of a premise, like, what would happen if you fell in love with your best friend's fiance? What would happen if you got married and one person wanted a baby and the other person didn't want a baby? Like, you can't compromise on that. You can't have a baby. Like, what happens? Or in this book, what would happen if you fell in love with the world's most eligible bachelor and you have this very different background? So that was kind of like the premise. Next part, other than the premise, so it doesn't go premise, plot, character. It goes premise, character, plot for me. Cool. So I come up with the premise, then I map out the characters, get to know them, and then I have a sense of beginning, middle, and end. So again, I'll use something borrowed because I don't feel bad spoiling that one. It's a movie and everything else. So in my mind, premise, girl falls in love with her best friend's fiance, characters, these people. In the beginning, it was Darcy doing the bad stuff. And I'm like, this is too predictable. So I flipped it. So the characters were the same, but I like went back and was like, no, she's going to be doing the cheating and she's going to be the one who's sort of like the victim. And then in my mind, beginning, middle, end was something happens with these two. They fall in love. Rachel realizes at the end that the friendship's unhealthy. He's a jerk. And she needs to be independent and ride off into the sunset in England with some, either alone, but with a potential hopeful new candidate for love. That was the book in my head. As I wrote it, so I have the premise, I have the characters, but as I wrote it and I put those characters on the page together and I saw, well, they really do. He's not a bad guy. And he is really in love with her, and you can see why he made these mistakes and why and so because their character development and the combinations of the characters and their chemistry changed as I wrote, then obviously the ending changed as well. So
that's really cool.
If that helps explain it. But in some ways this was harder because I was starting from, the real people, and it took me longer to get the book off the ground because I really wanted to make sure that I wasn't just telling the same story. And so it was harder. I thought it would be easier. I thought, oh, this is going to be this. I already have the framework.
Right.
It was actually harder and to get the book going. But then once I start writing, when I'm about halfway into it, a third of the way into it, then it starts to get fun. The first third is nerve wracking. You're like, can I do this? Can I pull this off? Do I feel anything, for these people, or am I just writing?
I think that's so interesting because I struggle with finishing. Like I can get through. I struggle with that getting it over the finish line, which is like, that's so interesting. So on that note, one question from the audience from Kim, Emily, I love all your books. What's your writing process? Do you outline, write several drafts, edit as you go? So let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of when you're trying to get the book off the ground. How are you getting it off the ground? What's your
Well, hi, Kim. I just touched on that a little bit with my premise, character, so forth, but more specifically, you're asking kind of more specifically about the writing process. I do not outline, so it's kind of in the back of my head. And I have notes, character notes of, what they're like, to try to like when they were born and what their siblings are, in the beginning, you need to sort of keep track of that sort of thing. But as I go, it just unfolds. And I do write several drafts. I write either the first draft that gets turned in, and then, I get notes from my editor, and I incorporate them into the second draft. And we discuss things along the way. Most of what she'll send me, I'll be like, oh yeah, of course, that's a great note. That's a great note. And sometimes you push back and you say, well, this is why I did it. And she's great to work with. Her name is Jennifer Hirsch. She's amazing. And then we turn it in again, and then another set of notes, and you turn it in again, and then it starts the copy editing, which is like the editing that most people think of as being editing, like commas and
all that stuff.
So
I love that. Speaking of editing, was meant to be the original title of the book, or
it was Sharon Carlson Person. It was the original title. I came up with that pretty early on, and it had that sort of I think romantic feel of, meant to be, like destiny, fate, or certain relationships meant to be. Can love conquer all is another sort of way of thinking about it, but
picture idea. Love that. And Anissa asks, is there a topic that you would like to write about, but it's not the right time, or is it a topic that's too controversial? I don't know that you have a topic that's too controversial.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't shy away from much in my real life. And so I don't think that there's a lot that I would shy away from it in my fiction either. I've written about abortion. Where We Belong was in that particular book, she wanted to get an abortion and changed her mind at the last minute. So, I mean, but it was her choice. So yeah, I really feel like I could anything that I want to talk about in terms of relationships, I would feel, open to.
I love that. And actually, Sharon had a follow-up question on the title too. It's a different cover for you. Like it's a different type of cover. Did you pick it out, or what was the process for the cover?
So yes, Sharon, great question. And I, let's see, I have a copy in the background here, but it's right here. It's, okay. I actually submitted a bunch of real photographs, and I said, I want this feel, but I want it to be a watercolor. I want it to be pastels, so that it sort of conjured up the the colors of a lot of my original paperback books or hardcover books, but that sort of whimsical sort of feel.
Yeah.
But I just felt sort of a little bit tired of the monochromatic, color thing. We've done that for so long that I wanted to change. And the art department at Random House is fabulous, and they work with you and they send you different ideas. I should do an Instagram post about that at some point of the other drafts, the original drafts of what they look like before we settled on this one. But I love that part of the process. I love that.
I mean, like it's because you're conceptualizing the whole thing, right? When you get to see like everything come together. I love that. And on that note, you've been out on book tour. You've been doing this. We're so grateful that you're here with us today. Margaret wants to know, what's your favorite way to reset from exhaustion and or craziness? Speaking of coming off of book tour.
Hey, Margaret. I think part of what I do every time is organize. Like, you organize your house. There's something about nesting. Like it's, I'm going through just old files and, kind of organizing the house a little bit.
And you're doing a big house renovation right now, right? Aren't you? Or is that creepy? I feel like I've been like totally looking at all the socials, which by the way, everybody should go follow Emily, obviously, on Instagram and all the social sites because she's
you're sweet. Yeah. Well, thank you. I share a lot of
home is beautiful. Your home is
thank you. Well, we're selling it. So selling the house, bought a new one, and yes, we're working on a renovation. So, it was like, I knew that had a book tour coming, and what do? I put my house on the market. My kids my 2 boys are graduating from high school. So it's been chaotic, but I think sometimes I thrive in that chaos. And Margaret, as I mentioned, I've been watching the Kardashians. So talk about a way to reset. It's just like sit on the sofa and queue up the next episode of their world. So
or if you're not Emily, pick up Emily's book and read it, because I imagine reading your own books wouldn't be very relaxing for you, but it's so relaxing for the rest of us. Emily, quick, like I have one more kind of serious question and then 2 like really quick, like kind of more fun ones. But I want to talk to you because you are one of the rare people that had a breakout success at the very, very, very beginning, right? In terms of, and I know you didn't sell your first book, but when you really hit it out of the park. How did you survive the success of that book? Because thankfully you have gone on to keep coming out with great books all the time. And I think some people, you're clearly not a one-hit wonder. And I think so many people, like, success can be almost as damaging as failure. And I'm curious how you survived that success and how you keep yourself writing. Like, how do you maintain the inspiration and the productivity?
Well, I love writing. So, I mean, it's a joy to write and to create characters and to have readers, out there. I love my readers. I feel like I have a relationship with them, with you all. And so it's just something I love to do. So that part's easy. There was a little, I shouldn't say easy, but that part is like a given. Like, that's what I want to pursue. There was a little bit of fear after Something Borrowed, because it's different writing a book, wondering if you'll get published, that it is when you have a, did I just lose you?
Nope.
Okay. So little document thing just flashed up on my computer. Let me close these windows. I don't know why.
Don't worry. We're still on. You're still
Where are you? Okay. I can't see you, but I'm just going to keep talking as if
that's okay. We can hear you and we can see you. So you're fine. Just continue as you were.
Okay. So, Something Borrowed. I remember when I wrote Something Borrowed, it was, then they bought St. Martin's Press bought the book and they said it's a 2-book deal. And I remember being panicked because I had never thought beyond the first, publishing a book. And it's like, it's a 2-book deal. And she said, what do you want to write about next? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. And so as I was revising Something Borrowed and trying to make Darcy, believe it or not, I toned her down from the first version.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like she was worse in early drafts. And in toning her down, I remember thinking, what would her side of the story be? So I called my editor and said, what would you think about writing the sequel told from the viewpoint of Darcy. And I didn't know whether she was going to say that's just such a cheesy idea, or we'd rather you do something fresh, or what she was going to say. But she said, oh, I love that. Go for it. So that's what I did. But I remember, and I'm going to just out myself with a bad review here, but I remember Something Blue came out, and someone, I guess, it was Time Out New York. Did a review, and my best friend, whose daughter is graduating from high school today, but my best friend, I'm like, go get a copy of Time Out, because I knew they were reviewing the book. And she came back and she's like, they didn't have any. And we worked in the MetLife building, Grand Central. It's like inconceivable that there wasn't a Time Out New York, like 7 different places. So I'm like, okay, how bad was the review? And she's like, don't read it. And I'm like, no, tell me. And so we got it out, and we started laughing, because it was like, it did a plot summary, and then it just said, Giffin's next had better be something new.
Oh no.
Dagger in the heart, which was my first bad review. And so it's a good question.
I like Something Blue. So so forget time. What's Time Out anyway? Who cares? I mean, there's jokes on that on them, because here you are. You're doing new stuff all the time, and you're continuing to do it, and we love you for it. What are you working on right now?
So right now, we are working on bringing The Lies That Bind, which was my last novel that came out 2 years ago, to the small screen in a limited series, a 5-part show. And the pilot's been written, and we have an outline for all of the episodes, and can't wait to get that project going. So I'm sort of taking a pause and working on that a little bit with the producers, and then thinking about, I have 3 or 4 ideas swirling around my head, new worlds and new characters. And it's going to be time here probably in the next month to start the next book, which is always, it was daunting and overwhelming and scary, but also really exciting.
And I know, and I should have, I mean, I want to let you go. I don't want to keep you too long, obviously. Translating your books into film and TV, is a totally different, amazing thing. And is that always obviously it's something every author has in mind, but what has that experience been like to see your work kind of evolve in different mediums? You have a very close hand in that, as opposed to so many other authors like you.
I'm very fortunate in that I have a very close relationship with the producers of Something Borrowed, who have also are the same ones who optioned The Lies That Bind. And we have some other projects that we're working on too. So yeah, it's great to collaborate in that way. And just sort of, writing is such a, you're so isolated when you're writing a novel, that it's nice to collaborate and talk to people and accept their expertise. So there's always going to be differences. I remember I didn't want Rachel to be there to be a spark between Ethan and Rachel, and there's not in the book, and there was in the movie. But those differences, I think, are important. And in the same The Lies That Bind, the plot has been we're doing a few things to the plot, but as long as, to me, as the characters are they feel like the same characters, and the tone, the overall tone, I wouldn't want to write something that's sort of a melancholic book like All We Ever Wanted, and then have it turn into like a comedy feel, or vice versa. But as long as the tone's right and the characters feel pretty true to I had in mind, I don't care if the plot's tweaked or changed, or a new character's added, or one disappears, and that doesn't really concern me as much. But writing will always be it is my passion. It will always be my focus. And I don't have a desire to move out west and work on one of the adaptations. And I publish every 2 years, and I would never want to disappoint my readers with, producing the next book. Even years, I always publish. So 2024 will be the next one.
That's awesome. Oh, we can't wait. It's always, every time you have a book come out, it's always a wonderful thing. It's such a great experience to read your work. Thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful. Thank you to all of us for joining us today. Thank you for your great questions.
Thank you.
And one last question before we go. Okay. Kennedys or Royals, if you could choose one person from either family, to spend a day with?
Dead or alive?
Dead or alive, can be dead or alive. Who would it be, and what would you do?
Ooh, okay.
Other than like JFK.
Well, the queen, the queen. I mean, the queen. She's like my favorite, other than people that I know and love. She's my favorite human being. And I just don't know what I'll do when she passes away. I mean, I adore her. So it would hands down be the queen. And if you said you had to just pick one from either family, dead or alive, I would still pick the queen over, say, President Kennedy. But if so, she's my pick. And then for the Kennedys, I mean, we should probably exclude these two because I've just written the book, and it feels like it would be John Jr. But other than I would say Bobby Kennedy fascinated me, and he sort of has always been my favorite. Nice. And then I would pick, if it had to be living, I would go with Ethel, because she's cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Emily. We're so appreciative. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Is out now. Pick up your copy if you haven't yet, and say hello to Emily on socials and let her know that you saw.
Oh, and I'm on TikTok now.
You're on TikTok. Here we go.
In the last 2 weeks, my teenagers convinced me that I had to be on TikTok. So come find me there as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you.
Us. I am Jenna Paone. Thank you for joining us on Lit Chick on a Microphone.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.